Alright, so today I'm here to prove why a carbon tax is the single best way to cut CO2 emissions. Contention 1, global warming. First, global warming is happening and it's caused by humans. Overwhelming scientific consensus supports this. According to a meta-analysis by scientist James Powell, Powell reviewed more than 24,000 scientific articles on climate changes published between 2013 and 2014. He identified 69,000 authors, only 4 of whom rejected climate change as being caused by human emissions. That's 1 in every 17,000 scientists. He found only 0.006% who rejected it. Scientists are virtually unanimous. Anthropogenic global warming is true. Secondly, a carbon tax can help this. It is the single best way to cut CO2 emissions and prevent the worst effects of global warming, droughts, floods, and superstorms. According to Laura Tyson, a professor at Berkeley's Business School, a carbon tax is the most effective way to discourage carbon consumption and lower the risk of catastrophic climate changes. In May, carbon dioxide levels reached nearly 400 parts per million. UN negotiators have set a limit of 450 parts per million to prevent irreversible changes. The world will cross this limit in just a matter of decades. Evidence of climate change is everywhere. The melting Arctic ice and extreme weather events including record droughts, heat waves, epic floods, and superstorms. A carbon tax is the most effective way and the most simplest way to reduce carbon emissions. Carbon emissions have an unpriced societal cost. A tax on carbon would reflect these costs and discourage carbon emissions. Producers and consumers would adjust their behavior. Any tax on carbon would be an important step in the right direction. Contention 2, green economy. A carbon tax would help the U.S. move towards a green economy by boosting economic growth while also benefiting the environment. According to Richard Caperton, writing for the Center of American Progress, a carbon tax will be paired with additional investments in clean energy. There is also a great need to repair transportation and water infrastructure. Some revenues from the tax could be directed towards these sectors. These investments benefit the economy. Infrastructure investments would put people to work. Even after protecting low-income consumers and investing in infrastructures, billions of dollars could be left over to help address our nation's debt. Climate change, economic growth, and fiscal responsibility may not appear to be intimately linked. They all have different causes. However, a price on carbon can make a significant contribution to solving each of these challenges. Contention 3. Alternatives worse. Without a carbon tax, the government will create a cap-and-trade system, which is far worse. It causes all the same harms with none of the benefits. According to Roger Powell, writing for Yale Environment 360, a cap-and-trade system is doomed to failure. Political reality will turn the theory of a hard cap into the practice of a very soft cap that has backdoors and safety valves that allow the cap to be evaded. A straight carbon tax is a far better place to start than a cap-and-trade system. $5 per barrel oil tax would not be noticed by consumers, but would raise $500 billion over 5 years to fund investments in a new green economy. A cap-and-trade is a political mess that cannot succeed in reducing emissions. A straight carbon tax is a much preferable approach. Thank you.
I'll start in 3, 2, 1, go. Well, carbon tax is taxing carbon, and it is bad because there's other good things that we can do as an alternative. And here's 3 reasons why. Contention 1, carbon leakage. A carbon tax is a bad idea because of carbon leakage. U.S. companies will move offshore to emit carbon in other countries, which harms the U.S. economy and causes more CO2 emissions. This is already happening, according to Suzanne Goldenberg, writing for The Guardian. The world's richest countries are outsourcing their carbon pollution to China and other rising economies. Since 2000, carbon dioxide emissions for China and the other rising economy have more than doubled. A growing share of global emission is released from the manufacture of products that are traded across the international borders. A carbon tax will only make it worse, according to Derek Morgan, writing for the Heritage Foundation. The carbon tax in the U.S. will have zero direct effect on the foreign emission. Unilateral action by the U.S. will have very little effect on total global emissions. Unilateral U.S. carbon will likely increase foreign emissions because of a phenomenon called carbon leakage. As an energy-intensive industry relocates from the U.S. to other nations, such as Mexico, Vietnam, or China, GHG emission and toxic pollutants could increase more than more than they would if those industries remained in the U.S. Contention 2, job loss. A tax on carbon would prevent businesses from investing and expanding as a result of higher energy costs. This is a result of job loss, according to David Kreutzer, writing for the Heritage Foundation. Since an overwhelming majority of America's energy needs are met by carbon-emitting fossil fuels, regulations directly raise the cost of electricity, gasoline, and home heating oil. Businesses would likely to pass those costs on to consumers. If a business company had to absorb the cost, the higher energy costs will squeeze profit margins to prevent businesses from investing and expanding. The result is higher energy costs, lowering income, and fewer jobs. This is a huge deal. Unemployment creates a vicious cycle that brings down the economy. According to Stephen Simpson, writing for the Investopia, unemployment leads to higher payments from the state and federal government unemployment benefits. Those governments are no longer collecting the same levels of income tax as before, forcing the government to borrow money. The reduction of those workers leaves the economy, which reduces the GDP. Contention 3, alternatives. We don't need a carbon tax because there's better options. A cap-and-trade system will help this problem way better than the carbon tax. According to Fred Krupp, writing for the Yale Environment 360, advantage of an emission cap is clear. Cap puts an illegal limit on pollution. Tax does not. Only a cap with strong emission reduction targets can guarantee that we achieve the environmental goal. When we create a market that rewards emission reduction, we put the vast know-how, manufacturing base, investment capital of the private sector to work. Cap and trade gives us an environmental guarantee that you can't get from a tax. It cleans the air, reduces our oil dependence, creates jobs, and averts a looming environmental crisis. This is why the con team is better than the pro. Thank you.
So, may I have the first question, please?
Sure.
For your contention in carbon leakage, you say that prices for CO2 could double in rising economies, but couldn't carbon leakage be good for rising economies?
What do you mean?
Like you say how companies will move offshore to other countries, but isn't that good for rising economies who need companies to raise their economy?
Well, that's pretty much against your point, because if companies move offshore, they're going to emit on other countries, which that means they're going to pollute on the other side of the world. And when they pollute on the other side of the world, they're doing nothing for our economy.
A carbon tax can prevent that.
That's why companies will move offshores to emit carbon, which will increase pollution there. And
which is why we implement a carbon tax.
That's why. That doesn't mean China or other rising economies will stop polluting. That doesn't mean anything.
So are you saying a cap and trade will help this?
Yes.
How so?
Cap and trade can help because even in your contention, you said carbon tax will not be noticed by consumers. That means that they're gonna pollute the same way that they did before. So the carbon tax does not mean anything. Cap and trade means more.
How so?
I just said.
Could you explain?
You said in your own contention.
I'm talking about cap and trade. I want you to explain how that works.
We put a strong cap on the pollution.
Yes, but what if it's not a strong cap?
Well,
how can you guarantee that it's a strong cap instead of a soft cap?
Then how can you guarantee that we will reduce carbon emission on
You said that a cap and trade could guarantee reduce carbon emissions, but a soft cap can't do that. And plus, it has safety valves and back doors that people could use.
What do you mean back doors?
Ways people could avoid the cap. You can't avoid a carbon tax. It's just
there. Can you give examples? How people can do that?
Like, what do you want me to give an example of?
Like how they'll avoid the cap.
You know the permits, right?
Yes.
They could avoid buying those, or they could just pay the fine. A cap doesn't even guarantee reduce carbon emissions.
But you said in your own words that the carbon tax will not be noticed by consumers. That means they are going to pollute the same way they did as before.
Not like that. I mean, it's not going to be a huge difference in the way how it's priced, but people, they won't completely ignore it or not notice it at all. I was saying that people wouldn't notice it to that extent where people will protest against it.
Prove to you why each one is flawed. They're wrong about carbon leakage. Number one, it won't happen. The U.S. can increase tariffs on countries without a carbon tax, so it will balance out and companies won't move overseas. According to Lawrence Summers, a professor and former president of Harvard University, some worry that taxing fossil fuels will encourage offshoring. A well-designed tax would be levied on imports coming from countries that did not impose their own carbon levies. Such a tax is compatible with World Trade Organization rules. 2. If major countries implement a carbon tax too, then carbon leakage cannot happen. For example, in Europe there has been action to tackle climate change, but companies aren't leaving Europe. Wendell Trier, writing on Politico, says, by 2035, Europe will remain the largest exporter of energy-intensive goods, said Wendell Trier, director of campaign group Climate Action Network. So there's no reason to scaremonger that the industry is going to leave Europe. He insisted that investment decisions were taken on a long-term basis, and even if the rest of the world did not have climate change policies today, there was no reason to assume that this would be the case in the coming decades. Other countries are moving. It's a myth that only in Europe are there climate abatement policies. Number 3, it definitely affects consumers. Even if the con proves that producers will move overseas, a carbon tax would still affect American consumers. People would still buy less fossil fuels, so it's a step in the right direction. In response to their contention about job loss, number 1, a carbon tax would actually lead to more jobs and overall economic growth. According to Rick McGalley, writing for CNN, if the U.S. implements even a modest carbon tax, we could generate $170 billion by 2030 to create jobs and build bridges, roads, and schools, reduce budget deficits, and cut taxes to spur private investment. Many fossil fuel job losses already have taken place. Carbon taxes are not the real threat to coal miners. Greedy energy companies are. Number 2, alternatives are worse. Cap and trade will result in extreme job loss. Catherine Richard, writing for PolitiFact, says, in an October 4th, 2009 ad in the Washington Post, the group said that 2 million jobs lost is another unfortunate truth about Congress's climate bill, which was a cap and trade. The organization has ramped up criticism of the cap and trade bill. Opponents of cap and trade argue that forcing industry to buy pollution credits will ultimately harm consumers and businesses. They argue that phasing out fossil fuels will require big job cuts and many employment opportunities will be sent overseas. A study predicts that net job losses could be as high as 2.5 million by 2030 and 3 million by 2050. In response to their alternatives contention, number 1, a carbon tax is better. It has many advantages over cap and trade. According to Charles Komanoff, writing for Yale Environment 360, only a carbon tax can quickly drive the transition from fossil fuels to renewable and efficient energy. It's far superior to cap and trade. Price certainty. The clear price signals from a carbon tax stand in stark contrast to the price volatility endemic to cap and trade. Simplicity and immediacy. British Columbia implemented a carbon tax in 5 months. Implemented a carbon tax in 5 months. North America's cap and trade system took 5 years of negotiation. Number 2, a carbon tax is the most efficient way to reduce emissions. It also spurs tons of economic development. The David Suzuki Foundation says, Sweden has used a carbon tax to reduce greenhouse gases since 1991. The Swedish Ministry of Environment estimated the carbon tax has cut emissions by an additional 20%. Sweden's carbon tax has been credited with spurring the innovation and use of green heating technologies. Although some critics claim a carbon tax would damage the economy, Sweden's carbon tax is a hefty $140 per ton on carbon pollution.
Okay. I'm starting in 3, 2, 1, go. They say that global warming, green economy, and alternatives are worse. It's some reasons that the contentions are flawed, but they are not. Their contentions are actually flawed. In response to global warming, 1. Doesn't stop warming. A carbon tax just won't reduce CO2 emissions that much. Brad Palmer, writing for the Washington Post, said, a carbon tax might not make a significant dent in U.S. global warming emissions. Modern economies are so heavily dependent on fossil fuels that there's only so much that we can reasonably cut back. Alternatives aren't readily available yet. With the carbon tax, emissions do start declining, but by 2030, emission levels stall. The U.S. wouldn't get anywhere near the 80% cut by 2050. Number 2, impact is far away. Global warming won't have large effects for decades. We can develop many other solutions before then. We need to focus on short-term problems like the economy. Number 3, inevitable. Other countries will still use fossil fuels. If the U.S. just stops using carbon, like the other countries will still use it. We can't stop global warming. Number 4, fossil fuels won't go away. Consumers still have to buy them. They can't just change into like Teslas like right at the first second they like make a carbon tax. They still have to use carbon. In response to green economy, 1, more jobs are lost and gained. Renewable energy is too expensive. The evidence is from our job loss contention. And number 2, tax revenue will be wasted. The pro assumes the government will spend the money perfectly, but political battles guarantee that some of the money goes to waste. It will not help fix our debt. Number 3, waste of money. We need to build an infrastructure first. Number 4, it harms large businesses. It's worse for the economy. In response to alternatives worse, number 1, cap and trade is better than the carbon tax. Only cap and trade can guarantee fewer CO2 emissions. Get the evidence from our alternatives contention. Number 2, there are other alternatives. If cap and trade won't work, then the government won't do it. The U.S. could also invest more in renewable energy, develop carbon sequestration technology, or pursue other options to minimize global warming. We don't have to do cap and trade. Number 3, global warming. If the customers don't realize the change in oil prices, like you say in your contention, they will still use the same amount of fossil fuels. That won't reduce global warming. Thank you. Do we start? Yeah. May I get the first question?
Yes.
Against job loss, what was your third question again?
My third response?
Yes.
Against job loss?
Yes.
I said we need to create sustainable economic growth. So in your response, you stated that we said that consumers wouldn't notice a tax, right?
Yes.
Wouldn't producers notice a tax because they would have to pay it as well?
But if the consumers don't, if the producers won't notice, they'll just move to other they'll just move to other countries.
But what if other countries implement a carbon tax too, or we increase tariffs on those countries that don't?
Wait, no. Like they might not have a carbon tax. The company will move to a country that doesn't have a carbon tax. Like they're not stupid to move to a country that has a carbon tax. They'll do the research and all this stuff so that they'll move to a country that doesn't have a carbon tax or a tariff.
Can't the U.S. increase tariffs on countries like that?
If they increase tariffs, it will cause dispute against countries.
How will that cause dispute?
If they just put a tariff on them, like they'll just get mad because like they have to pay more money to get oil.
But then, if they just implement a carbon tax, it would be the U.S. wouldn't have to have a tariff anymore.
Why would they even want to put a carbon tax? You don't know that they're gonna put a carbon tax on their country.
Well,
Not every country wants the oil to be expensive.
Well, one way to prevent carbon leakage was to increase tariffs. So.
Okay, can I get a question?
Yes.
Okay, you contradicted your contentions. In your global warming contention, you said that like carbon tax will like decrease global warming, but in your alternatives worst contention, you said that like a $5 per barrel oil tax would not be noticed by consumers, but would raise $500 billion over 5 years to fund investments in a new green economy. you said that $5 per barrel oil tax will not be noticed by consumers. Like if it's not noticed by consumers, they're just going to spend the same amount of carbon, and then it's just going to cause global warming the same way.
An upstream carbon tax where only the producers have to pay it? So the
They can
consumers
just
are
move
definitely
out
not.
carbon leakage.
Yeah, but like there's U.S. oil companies that mine oil in the U.S. You can't move to a country without oil and go mine oil there.
Some countries have oil too, like.
But they're probably going to have a carbon tax because oil makes countries richer. And rich countries tend to care about the environment.
Response to our contention, global warming, for number one, they said, a carbon tax will not stop global warming. It's too dependent on carbon products. Our economy is too dependent on carbon products, that's what they said. However, a carbon tax will definitely decrease prices. Definitely will decrease global warming. It increases the prices, and that's guaranteed. No one can avoid that. However, in a cap and trade, people can avoid that through their back doors, or they can just pay the fine. It doesn't guarantee reduced emissions. And you also said the impact of global warming is too far away. We should focus on other things. However, the impact is far away, but we should use what little time we have to solve this problem. So when the time gets there, we aren't blown away. And you also said in your response that if the U.S. stops polluting, other countries will keep polluting. However, if the U.S. stops, that means that's a lot of millions of people stopping, which is a lot of reduced CO2 emissions. So that's contradicting your own point. For your second response against our contention green economy, you say that more jobs are lost than gained. However, as I said before, Jonas here explained it in his response. A carbon tax will increase jobs and a cap and trade will decrease jobs, so that goes away. He also said carbon tax won't help at all. However, a carbon tax is the best solution. It will increase jobs, and a cap and trade will. A carbon tax will help. I pretty much explained that in all my contentions. And he also said that cap and trade will build infrastructure or something like that, and how a carbon tax can do that too. It increases money for the economy and in jobs. For your third response against our alternatives worst contention, you said that cap and trade will better guarantees lower emissions. However, a carbon tax can also guarantee this. It increases prices.
Carbon leakage is how companies will move overshore and emit carbon on other countries, and it hurts our economy. It will happen because oil is more expensive, and you said and when it's expensive, they'll move over shores to emit carbon in other countries. And you said it can't happen, but when energy is more expensive, they will have to move over shores and emit carbon there. You said it will affect consumers. You said they will notice the tax. Well, that means that companies will have a hard time paying for the oil and will move away. So their responses are false. For job loss, you said more jobs than gain, more jobs, and it will make the economy rise. Well, that's false because when oil is more expensive, people will lose jobs, and it will hurt the economy if there's no jobs to have. You said alternatives are worse. However, it's really better because when carbon tax is not there, but instead cap and trade is there, it's going to have a way better result. You say we need a sustainable economy growth. Well, carbon tax cannot help that. Alternatives, you said tax is better, but however, this is false because it will hurt the economy by making companies move over shore. And you said tax is most efficient way, but this is false because it's not the most efficient way because it will make the companies move over shores.
Can we get the first question?
Yes.
In your summary, you said that you can just pay the fine if they have a cap and trade. But can't you just pay the fine for the carbon tax too?
There's no fine for a carbon tax. You pay this extra price on oil.
Yeah,
You
the
can't get
extra
past that.
price is like basically the same thing as a fine.
So like, imagine this: if you're going to the store to buy something, you're like, and the price is $1. Can
Yeah,
you
you
say,
have to-
"Oh, I'm just going to"?
It's gonna pay 50 cents and not pay the rest. You can't do that.
You have to pay it. It's not. You can't get around a carbon tax.
But you have to pay the fine too, or you're just gonna go
No, you
bankrupt
don't.
and-
You don't. Well,
There's-
for
The government can force you to.
do you know what it means? I mean, do you know what the fine is for a cap and trade? It's if you go over the price or limit however much you're supposed to buy. People can pay that fine if they want.
Yeah, people can pay
Companies
the
are
carbon
rich.
tax if they want.
They have to pay it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to pay the
Yes,
carbon
but
tax and
gradually
they
it
have
gets
to
more
pay the fine.
expensive, so it gets harder and harder to pay. So
Yeah,
then
the fine
people
gets more
have to move
expensive
away
if they move
from
more.
fossil fuels.
Well, that hurts our economy because
I don't
carbon
think you
leakage.
understand. A cap and trade's fine is if you buy too much oil, it will fine you.
In replacement for like all the jobs loss, you said it hurt the economy, right? But it's going to create a green economy sector because of the discouragation, or if that's a word, discouragement of fossil fuels.
May I ask you what is the green energy?
Green economy.
Green
I explained
economy?
that in my contention.
What,
It was our second contention.
What is the energy that we're
Like,
gonna
they can't
use
just
instead of-
change it.
We invest. We use the money from carbon tax to
Hydroelectric
invest.
power, wind power.
But how are we gonna use that in like?
Yeah, and
Can
It
we move
generates
on?
electricity.
Guys,
people
can we move
can't just
on?
move to Teslas. There's no like electric charging stations like everywhere. There's
That's
no.
not the main problem, though. Can I ask a question? You said that tax is not efficient, but how is it not efficient when a carbon tax in British Columbia took 5 months, while a cap and trade in North America took 5 years?
How do you know that?
I read it in my evidence.
Wait, how do you know that it will take 5
It
years?
took. It already
Stating
happened.
When did they even do it?
Let's say that it's more like efficient, but like a cap and trade is more like guaranteed
like,
it more.
5 years to implement. And
And
by
you
that
said
time,
that-
global warming will have irreversible effects.
Okay.
And
Well,
we'll spend that time debating over whether a cap and trade should be implemented.
But like as you said in your alternative worst contention, they won't notice the change.
When I say they won't notice the change, I'm saying that people won't protest against it because it's not that big of a change.
They're not going to be
They'll
like,
still be
oh
paying
my
that
god, oil is so much expensive. I can't buy this much.
Alright.
At the end of the day, I believe that the pro team has won this debate because we have proven that a carbon tax will have a greater impact on global warming and will reduce emissions better than a cap and trade. It's better than a carbon tax. We believe is better than a cap and trade because it's more efficient. It can be implemented easier. It discourages consumption, creates more jobs, and creates more government for the creates more money for the government. The con team states that a carbon tax is inefficient because of carbon leakage, but in fact this is not true. They have not given a direct response to the U.S. tariffs on countries. They've only said that it would decrease economic activity, but I've already proven that wrong. So they've also claimed that job loss is going to happen as a result of a carbon tax. But this is in fact not true, as there will be a new green economy sector. So at the end of the day, I urge you to vote for the pro team because the pro team will have the greater impact on global warming, will move us into the future with a new greener world.
You have 45 seconds.
Okay, so when the con team says alternatives, they said a cap and trade will induce a legal limit, but a cap and trade will do the same thing but better because it will decrease people from using fuels, and so there will be new startups that will try to solve this because, like the con team said, they said that there aren't readily available alternatives yet, but carbon tax will help create these alternatives.
Is everyone ready?
Yep.
I'm starting in 3, 2, 1, go. At the end of the day, a carbon leakage is the biggest deal here. Carbon leakage will happen, and if it does, global warming will barely be reduced. And cap and trade can help better than a carbon tax. to defend our point, in their final focus, they said that like a carbon tax will be way more efficient. But like we never implemented a carbon tax yet. We don't know how long it's gonna take to implement it. No, yes. And they said that we have not given a direct tariff response, but like you can't just give tariffs to like every country in the world, and like it'll cause dispute if you just put tariffs in like a lot of countries. Going on to attacking their point on global warming, even in their contention, alternatives worse. They stated that consumers won't notice the carbon tax. They contradicted themselves, and they'll pollute the same if that happens, and the companies can move over, as we proved in our carbon leakage contention. And in the crossfires, they said that we can just put a tax on the companies, but if you don't put a tax on the consumers, they won't move to Teslas or anything because the cost will be the same. And against the green economy contention, they said that harming large businesses is not leading to we're going to say that harming large businesses is not leading to a green economy. If the companies move over, it will only harm the economy. It won't help the economy that like other countries are moving over to, like other places. Against their alternative worst contingent, actually they're better. It guarantees reduction. That's why the con team should win this debate. Thank you.